So talking a little bit more about some of the science that is happening on board. For longer journeys to the moon and Mars, we've talked a little bit about this. The International Space Station is such an amazing test bed for us to conduct scientific research, experiments themselves, but also on human bodies. So as we think about those missions, the scientists are looking at how this extended time in space affects the human body, because of course we know missions to Mars are going to be longer than these 6-month mission durations to the International Space Station. So astronauts on these missions of various length can participate in an integrated set of studies that monitor their health before, during, and after the missions. These are 14 experiments. They are collectively called the Complement of Integrated Protocols for Human Exploration Research. To shorten that, we just call it CIPHER. These collect multiple physiological and psychological measures of the human response to time and space. So these results could play a pivotal role in ensuring the safety, the health, the success of astronauts on deep space exploration missions, which of course is our next big goal.
Right, like we've sent humans, hundreds of thousands of miles away, but on interplanetary missions, they're going to be going potentially millions of miles away, right? And we would like to know, maybe how these long duration missions affect the body, so that we can understand how the body will react, in a longer period of time, maybe longer than 6 months. It could be months, it could be years.
And we do have NASA astronaut Frank Rubio on board, who will, when he comes home, hold the record for the longest amount of time in space. I believe it's 371 days. So over a year in space for an American astronaut. That'll be the new record. He is still on board. We expect to see him come home next month. So I know he must be looking forward to his return to Earth. Now, our next milestone is we expect waypoint 0 arrival. Again, that'll be at about 5:17 a.m. Pacific time, so about 15 minutes from now. And again, if you're just tuning in, this is Dragon making its way to the International Space Station, this view coming from the space station itself.
And again, we are taking your questions on X with the hashtag AskNASA. See if we have some questions here. How long was the prep for this mission overall? Ooh, that's a great question.
Yeah, so, a lot of these crew members have been assigned to this mission for probably over a year-ish, but they've been astronauts for longer, or a cosmonaut for longer. We know Satoshi Furukawa was selected as an astronaut in 1999. So upon selection, you really start your prep for your missions, even though you don't necessarily know what mission you'll be on at that time. But you start things immediately, like training how to use the systems on the International Space Station, how to perform maintenance, how to do spacewalks. So your training really starts the day you become an astronaut candidate. However, training for this mission gets a little more intense when they are assigned, and when they can come here to Hawthorne and start training with the teams here, as well as training specific experiments they might conduct on the International Space Station.
Right, it's not just training for the liftoff and launch to the International Space Station, but it's all the training that includes, flying, potentially flying Dragon if needed, performing the science experiments on the International Space Station.
a.m. Pacific, so about 12 minutes from now. Again, they will not pause there. They will go to pass through to waypoint 1. That's about 220 meters away from the International Space Station. This view again from inside Dragon, crew monitoring as Dragon flies autonomously to the International Space Station, continuing to get closer and closer. That approach initiation burn brought us up about 400 meters directly below the station. We are now about 686 meters from the station, or about 0.4 miles. So getting closer and closer, again looking for docking at 9:05 a.m. Eastern, 6:05 a.m. Pacific, so almost exactly an hour from now.
And we did see views of the International Space Station before, which looked like a tiny little dot, and now we are getting so close that you can really see the International Space Station there, and that's on your left-hand screen. And looking from the International Space Station to Dragon on your right-hand screen, getting a really cool view of Dragon.
And you see that glow. That is the spacecraft are both going into an orbital daytime. So we've talked about how at orbital velocity, you're orbiting the Earth at 17,500 miles per hour. You see a sunrise or a sunset every 45 minutes. So they're going into that sunrise period. That's why you saw that glow, that blooming on the camera. They will be there again for about 45 minutes. It does look like we may dock just as we get into an orbital nighttime. But again, this view on your right-hand side of the screen, the Dragon capsule itself, and then its destination on the left, the International Space Station, both have eyes on each other. And we are in the big loop, as we talked about earlier, meaning they can all communicate on the same communication network.
We did get a go for approaching waypoint 0 as well as waypoint 1. We're just about 10 minutes away from the expected time of arrival at waypoint 0. And again, this is just a checkpoint. They do not need to stop. They can continue to pass through waypoint 0 and move to waypoint 1, which will swing it up and out in front of the space station. And it will pause at a distance of approximately 220 meters away from the station.
Now, right now, as we speak, the International Space Station has just started flying over the state of Washington. It's about to fly directly over Seattle. So if you're in the area, it is about to cross over into Canada as well. So if you're in that area near that border, go outside, maybe look up. You can always check out spotthestation.nasa.gov to see when it'll fly over you. But it is going to pass over the continental U.S. Right now. It's flying right over the state of Washington. So I'm sure if they looked down right now, would have beautiful views of the mountain ranges there. It'll be south of Calgary here pretty shortly.
And as you mentioned earlier, you don't need a telescope to see the International Space Station. You can actually see it with the naked eye. It's about the size of a football field and big enough for you to walk outside and be able to see it pass by.
And I know they can't see me, but I always wave.
Hey, you never know.
So again, things still progressing pretty smoothly this morning. Next milestone being that they will pass through, will not stop at waypoint 0, less than 8 minutes from now. And a reminder, we are going to the zenith, or the space-facing port of the International Space Station today. They will be next-door neighbors with Dragon Endeavour, which is at the forward-facing port on Node 2. And right now on the International Space Station, we have 7 crew members. So we are going to have 11 people living and working on the orbiting laboratory for the next several days. We'll start looking at an undocking timeline and a splashdown date for Crew 6 pretty soon. But we want to make sure they get that handover time. So right now, again, 7 people living on the space station. Right now, it looks like 4 of them are having their midday meal. So on the space station, they use Greenwich Mean Time. It's just a little bit after noon there, about 12:10 p.m. A few of them are eating. Again, this is a weekend day, so technically, sometimes if there's not operations going on, they do get time off on the weekends. They're able to relax, talk to family members. Right now, several of them are eating, and then Woody Hoberg will step into the Dragon approach monitoring. He will also work on pressurizing the vestibule once we are docked.
And on your screen is a pretty cool view from the International Space Station looking at Dragon. You could see the nose cone deployed, and you can also see some of the thrusters. They're using the Draco thrusters to maneuver Dragon towards the International Space Station. You can see Earth in the background.
Yeah, right now they are flying over Saskatchewan, so south of Saskatoon. That's the view below Dragon there. And then Dragon's view of the International Space Station. So if you're in that area, go take a look up. You might spot our crew members. again, less than an hour away from docking now. It will bring that crew up to 7 people.
And we are about 5 minutes from reaching waypoint 0. Expected time is 5:17 a.m. Pacific time.
So during that crew handover period, when we talked about, these 11 crew members on the International Space Station, we have Crew 6. That consists of Stephen Bowen, Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al-Nayati, and Andrei Fedyayev. They have been living up there for about 6 months now. And before we bring them home, we want them to be able to talk to Crew 7. We have some first-time flyers, especially on this spacecraft. So we want them to be able to show them the ropes of what's going on aboard the International Space Station. They can hand over any science experiments that they've been working on, show them any of the safety protocols. That's actually one of the very first things that they will do right after they dock. They will move into an ISS safety briefing. They get a lot of training on the ground about how to handle any contingencies or off-nominal situations, but once you get in space, it's just different. You need to do it again. You need the refresher. So it's safety is the utmost importance. So that's the first thing that they'll do after they dock and do their welcoming ceremony for us. But that crew handover period it gives a nice buffer for these team members to be able to share what's been happening on the International Space Station over the last 6 months with this crew who has just arrived. This view from another camera on the International Space Station. Again, this station right now is about 262 statute miles over Earth, actually flying over Ontario at this point. It's moving pretty fast. Just a couple minutes ago, it was flying over Washington State. We're now all the way over Ontario, so 17,500 miles an hour. That is about 5 miles per second. Quite speedy.
And speed is relative, so it doesn't look that fast on your screen, but that is very, very fast.
We are just a few minutes now from passing through waypoint 0. And we expect to pass through waypoint 1 as well. That'll be about 20-25 minutes following our pass through waypoint 0. Again, these are points built into the docking process. That way, if we needed to hold at these, we definitely can. It's a great opportunity to check out any systems, but the teams here in Hawthorne as well as in Houston have pulled go. They're not tracking any issues that would preclude us from a safe docking. Again, looking at that coming up at about 6:05 a.m. Pacific. And our Cronus flight controller in Houston is the one who is navigating these cameras on the International Space Station. So they always do a great job of getting us some really amazing views as Dragon gets closer.
Again, just as a reminder, waypoint 0 will mean that Dragon is 400 meters directly below station, and as it maneuvers to waypoint 1, that is basically swinging the vehicle to out in front of the station, and it will be approximately 220 meters away from station. And that is coming up here in just about 2 minutes from now. We're reaching waypoint 0 is coming up in about 2 minutes.
Waypoint 1 puts us on the docking axis, so it pretty much lines us directly up with that corridor that the spacecraft will follow all the way in to where it docks on the zenith port of the International Space Station. There is a pause at waypoint 2. That's about 20 meters away, so that is kind of the final check of all the systems on both sides of the spacecrafts to make sure that everyone's still go for docking. We're not tracking any major issues. They can hold there for any lighting changes if they wanted to, but not always necessary. So sometimes it's a brief pause, and sometimes they just hold to make sure that everything is checking out as planned.
And you did just see a view inside of the cabin of Dragon, and you saw our astronauts, our commander and pilot, there basically just monitoring. Dragon is an autonomous vehicle, so really all the crew needs to do is just monitor as they approach the station. There's really no manual driving or flying at this point.
This gives you a great view with the nose cone open. That's where the docking mechanism is located. That's the hatch through which these astronauts will fly through Dragon and into the International Space Station. Of course, yesterday during launch, we saw them enter through the side hatch. They won't use that again until they splash down and are back on Earth and egress on the recovery ship. So, we just got confirmation. We have arrived at waypoint 0. We are converging our trajectory on waypoint 1. So again, things continuing to move smoothly. We'll start to get a different view of the International Space Station as we're going to be going to the zenith port. So we're going to be going directly above it. We'll be looking down on the space station. So that view we have right now of the space station looking down on Dragon, it'll be flip-flopped. So Dragon will be looking down on the space station and see Earth below that. So again, we've just reached waypoint 0, which means Dragon is 400 meters directly below station. And we can see it in views now coming from the International Space Station. But coming up, Dragon will move from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1. That'll swing it up and out in front of the space station, actually directly above it, pausing at a distance of approximately 220 meters. Again, that puts us on the docking axis. That essentially means it's directly in front of the docking port. And again, we've heard teams do the go, no go polls. Everything remains go for us this morning. So again, coming up next, we will see
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop. Approach 0 has started and the trajectory has converged on waypoint 1. Expect arrival at waypoint 1 around 1259er UTC.
SpaceX Dragon copies on the big loop, arrival at waypoint 1 at 1259er.
And just the core communicating with the crew, confirming that they are on their way to waypoint 1. Now, this maneuver from waypoint 0 to waypoint 1 is coming up in just about 30 minutes from now. So we do have some time as this maneuver happens. This is a slow and steady process. Again, we are traveling at 17,500 miles per hour, but the process is slow and steady as we pass through each one of these checkpoints to make sure that we can monitor everything that's happening and make sure that the vehicle is safe, the crew is safe, as well as the International Space Station is also safe before we begin docking with the space station.
we were just talking about what's underneath the nose cone. So obviously the docking port, but we also have those forward bulkhead thrusters. We use those for some of the larger burns. We also have the service section Draco thrusters. Those are positioned around the spacecraft. We'll just be using those service section Dracos as we get closer to the International Space Station again, very fine-tuned. And this, I just noticed, is very cool. On the left side of your screen, up a little, if you're looking towards the top of the International Space Station or towards the top of your screen, you can see Dragon Endeavour docked to that forward-facing port. Again, we are going to the zenith port, so you can see that outline perfectly. That's so fascinating. You can also see some of those International Space Station rollout solar arrays, those IROSAs. If you look towards the right side, you know, they look like they are a little bit detached, sort of. They are mounted differently on our solar arrays. Again, we have passed through waypoint 0, heading up to waypoint 1. International Space Station looking especially beautiful this morning. We are in that orbital daytime. We are now flying over the Atlantic Ocean, so we have at this point passed over the continental U.S., North America.
And on your left-hand screen is a view inside of Dragon. On your left-hand side is Commander Jasmine Mogbelli, and on your right-hand side is the pilot for this mission, Andreas Mogensen. Again, they are just monitoring. They are able to confirm, on their displays that what they see matches what we see here in Mission Control as they make their way to docking to the International Space Station. And these views are really awesome. Seeing Earth in the background, looking almost so crisp there.
I know. And Crew 7, once they arrive at the International Space Station, they will have these beautiful views for about 6 months, living and working, doing science and research on the International Space Station. We did get an updated docking time. It has shifted just a few minutes to the right. We're now tracking 9:08 a.m. Eastern Time. Literally just a 3-minute change, so just fine-tuning after we've done the approach initiation burn and that mid-course maneuver. Again, we've passed through waypoint 0, moving up toward waypoint 1. Things continue to look good so far for Dragon Endurance on its journey to the International Space Station. And the astronauts, the first crew to fly on a spacecraft, have the opportunity to name it. And so the first flight of Endurance was the Crew 3 mission. It was named Endurance by the astronauts themselves. Obviously, they said it's a tribute to the tenacity of the human spirit as we push farther than ever with commercial opportunities in low Earth orbit and plans to go to the moon and Mars. So common theme.
Awesome. We're seeing another view from the International Space Station.
Yeah, if you look closely, there's Dragon in the center there. Again, our Cronus flight controller tracking these views for us in Mission Control Houston.
Thank you, Cronus. And as a reminder, as Dragon approached waypoint 0, was directly under the International Space Station. As it moves to waypoint 1, it's actually going to swing up and align itself with the space station. So you no longer will be looking down from the space station and have that view of Earth in the background, because it will be aligned with the docking port, which is the zenith port today. It's the space-facing side of the International Space Station.
Once our astronauts arrive and our cosmonaut arrive to the International Space Station today, they will be members of Expedition 69. That will remain their designation, so they won't keep these roles, these titles that they have right now. We have Jasmine Mogbelli as our commander. Once she gets to the International Space Station, she will be a flight engineer. And they will remain Expedition 69 until departure of Soyuz next month. That'll be bringing Frank Rubio home. That is when we will enter Expedition 70. So their titles will change over at that point to Expedition 70 crew members. We're about 25 minutes until we expect to reach waypoint 1. Sorry, about 35 minutes, I believe. Again, that's that 220 meter. It can be used as a hold point. I don't think we intend to use it as a hold point today, but it is on the docking axis. It'll be directly above the International Space Station, directly above that zenith port on Node 2.
And we are taking questions on X with the hashtag AskNASA. And this one is, where can I see the post-launch news conference from yesterday? And also, you're doing a good job. Good job,
Thank you
Leah.
so much. Good job, Jesse. Thank you so much. You can find the post-launch news conference on NASA's YouTube. They did a great job breaking down the ascent and what it looks like for this rendezvous profile. So if you want to go back, take a look at NASA's YouTube, you can search for the Crew 7 post-launch news conference, and it should come right up. Next question is, when will Crew 7 be back to Earth?
Well, these are long-duration rotational missions, but the durations are approximately 6 months. So every 6 months, we fly a crew up to the International Space Station, and the crew on board will then return back home. So Crew 7 will be up there for about 6 months and come back.
We're starting to see the views change a little bit. You know, we were looking directly down on Dragon, but now we are swinging up and above the International Space Station, because we'll be docking to that Zenith port. So again, like I mentioned earlier, we were looking directly down on Dragon with the Earth below it. Pretty soon, Dragon will be looking directly down on the International Space Station with the Earth below it. Looks like right now they are flying off the west coast of Senegal, about 260 statute miles above Earth.
And if you're just now joining us, you are tuned in to the Crew 7 mission. The crew launched last night at 12:27 a.m. Eastern Time. 12:27 a.m. Pacific Time, 3:27 a.m. Eastern Time. And now the crew is making their way to the International Space Station. We've already had a few burns. We've passed through checkpoint waypoint 0, and now the vehicle is swinging up towards waypoint 1. We are just under 25 minutes away from the expected time of arrival to waypoint 1, which will put the vehicle in line with the docking adapter on the International Space Station, and also put the vehicle directly above the International Space Station.
So if you're tracking, that's an almost 30-hour ride to orbit. The crew are suited up now. They are in their seats. They have not had to do so during the flight, and we just got a really cool view of one of those Draco thrusters firing, helping us fine-tune our approach to the space station. Our 4 crew members arriving today: Jasmine Mogbelli, Andreas Mogensen, Satoshi Furukawa, and Konstantin Borisov. Dragon looks pretty small in this picture, but we are getting closer and closer to the International Space Station. Waypoint 1 is our next really milestone. That'll be 220 meters directly above the station. We'll pass through that, head to waypoint 2, which is a hold point. It can be a brief pause. That's 20 meters away from the docking port. And once the astronauts arrive, they will be joining a crew of already 7 people living on the International Space Station, so bringing that total up to 11. The other astronauts and cosmonauts living on the station right now are Stephen Bowen, Woody Hoberg, Sultan Al-Nayati, Andrei Fedyaev, Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopyev, and Dmitry Petelin.
And we just had a view from the International Space Station looking at Dragon from a bit further away, and now we've got a very good close-up as Dragon gets closer and closer to the International Space Station.
Yeah, looking crystal clear. Again, that nose cone is open. Of course, when we launch, it is closed, and when we re-enter its atmosphere, it's closed to protect that docking mechanism that's beneath it. So that's exactly the point that'll line up with that zenith port on the International Space Station. It'll dock. The teams on the space station will take some time to make sure they pressurize the vestibule. That's the space between the Dragon hatch and the space station hatch. So when Dragon docks, that space is going to be out of vacuum. It's been previously exposed to outer space. And we want to make sure that it's equalized before we open up those hatches and the crew floats in. So that is a process that takes about an hour-ish, making sure that we've got all those levels equaled out before we welcome the crew aboard the space station. Yeah, this is another view from the International Space Station. You can see one of the robotic arms on the left, and close to center of your screen, that is Dragon. And that robotic arm is attached to the Japan exposed facility, so we are able to put some of our experiments outside in the vacuum of space. Again, we are about 23, 22 minutes away from waypoint 1, reaching waypoint 1. Can be used as a hold point. We do not anticipate doing so today. We're heading to the zenith port of the space station on node 2, and it'll continue flying in. It'll be on that docking corridor until it's about 20 meters away. And we are looking for docking today at 9:08 a.m. Eastern Time, 6:08 a.m. Pacific Time. And this again is Dragon Endurance that we're looking at. It flew first on the Crew 3 mission. It also flew the Crew 5 astronauts to the International Space Station.
Dragon SpaceX on the Big Loop. Expect reconfiguration of the C2V2 return link shortly.
SpaceX, Dragon copies on the Big Loop.
And a reminder, we are taking your questions on X with the hashtag AskNASA, so if there's something you're curious about, let us know. This question from Jack: what have the astronauts been doing in between launch and docking?
Well, they've been floating around a bit. But they have had some rest periods, some meal periods. They're able to eat while they're in microgravity as they're making their way to the International Space Station. After ascent, once they made it to orbit, they were able to get out of their spacesuits and actually enjoy microgravity. And they've also, needed to follow some procedures. As we're getting closer and closer to the International Space Station, they did have to prepare for some of the burns that enable the Dragon vehicle to get or to approach the International Space Station. So a plethora of activities over the past 30 hours.
Yeah, they also get the opportunity to eat if they want to. They have some shelf-stable meals that they can choose from, and you'll probably hear after docking, they will report out what was consumed. Not necessarily the food itself, but they'll say this many packets from this bag. Everything is so meticulously tracked in space and on the International Space Station. It can be difficult. It's not the same as here on Earth. If I put something down on the table, I know it's going to stay there thanks to gravity. But on the International Space Station, we want to make sure we know where everything is at all times, because it can float away pretty easily. So just reporting also what was consumed, that gives the teams here in Hawthorne as well as in Houston a good look at what is also available for later use as well.
Yeah, and on the broadcast for the launch of Crew 7, NASA astronaut Jessica Meir actually mentioned, how good the meals ready to eat actually are. She really gave an ode to, how cool it is to be able to bring, some flavors from, some of the astronauts' favorite types of food with them to the International Space Station. On Dragon, they aren't able to heat up any of the food, but they are able to hydrate any dehydrated food while on Dragon. And then once they get to the International Space Station, they actually do have the ability to warm up food and have a hot meal. And we do have another question. Again, as a reminder, we are taking questions on X with the hashtag AskNASA. Do the astronauts stay in that seated position the entire trip there? So for Crew 7, that would be for 30 hours.
Yeah. No, that doesn't sound super comfortable, and thankfully they don't have to. So like we talked about, after they get on orbit, after they're out of that dynamic period of flight, the nose cone is opened. They get a call from the Corps here in Hawthorne that they can get out of their seats as well as their suits. So they're able to take their suits off and kind of be in their own comfortable clothing, whatever they've worn underneath. We ask them to put those back on shortly before we get into this approach initiation phase. So they are back in their suits right now. They are also in their seats. Of course, we don't expect anything to be off nominal in this situation, and we are moving pretty slowly, but it's still considered a dynamic period of flight because we're getting closer to the International Space Station and docking itself. We are about 15 minutes from waypoint 1. Again, our next pit stop on the way to the space station, about 220 meters above the Node 2 Zenith docking port.
And again, this will put Dragon directly above the International Space Station. So you could see on your screen, Dragon made its way to waypoint 0, which was directly under the International Space Station, so between Earth and the International Space Station. And now it is swinging upwards and will be above the International Space Station, basically on the space side of the station. And again, we are expecting that arrival at waypoint 1 at 5:59 a.m. Pacific time.
And we got the go from the International Space Station team that they are good to have Dragon proceed past waypoint 1. So waypoint 1, they will stop at waypoint 2 again. That's about 20 meters from the space station. That's the final checkpoint before moving in. And we expect to see them at waypoint 1 in about 12 minutes from now. Shortly after that, it moves pretty quickly. It is slow and steady, but at the same time, we're anticipating docking at 6:08 a.m. Pacific. That is 9:08 a.m. Eastern time. So just about 30 minutes from now, we should see our new crew arrive at the space station. Of course, if we needed to, we can hold at waypoint 2 for quite a while just to make sure we have conditions on the spacecraft, on the International Space Station, any lighting conditions, just the way we want them before we move on in.
And just to recap some of our milestones, we had an approach initiation burn at 4:29 a.m. Pacific time. That's 7:29 p.m. a.m. Eastern time. As well as we did require an approach initiation mid-course maneuver, which happened at 4:56 a.m. Pacific time, 7:56 a.m. Eastern time. And again, we've passed through waypoint 0. We're on our way to waypoint 1. And as Leah mentioned, after waypoint 1 is waypoint 2, just 20 meters from the International Space Station. There will be that will be a checkpoint where they will make sure that everything is good before docking. And again, docking is autonomous. Dragon is an autonomous vehicle, so the astronauts still are just monitoring all the way until the vehicle basically latches onto the International Space Station.
We'll start hearing more and more chatter, too, as we get closer between all the crew members. And one of the call-outs that we'll hear just as the crew is about to make contact with the International Space Station is CHOP, or that stands for Crew Hands-Off Point. That's about 2 meters from the space station. At that point, the crew should not be sending any commands to Dragon. However, again, we really don't anticipate that they would be because it is an autonomous docking. So about 10 minutes away till we reach waypoint 1. Again, we're going to move right on through, head to that waypoint 2 hold point, and then we are about 20 minutes away from docking itself. So again, we're docking to the Node 2 Zenith port today. That's the space-facing port. And this is, we may not see the docking. We may see it. But we have 2 bands of communication on the International Space Station. We have the KU band, which is how our video comes down. We have the S band. That's our sound and audio. The KU band antenna, we do something called KU masking. So we send commands to this antenna to not radiate in a certain area because it could reflect off of Dragon and the International Space Station. So we don't want that to radiate onto Dragon and back on the antenna itself. It can damage the antenna. It's a higher power KU link, so we don't want to damage that antenna dish if we don't have to, obviously. It can, risk the electronics inside, any tracking sensors, so we may not see docking. There is still a possibility. It just kind of depends on the location of those antennas at the time. But if we don't have video of the docking from that one location, obviously we will still have audio communications as well as comms with the crew to let us know that Dragon has arrived.
Again, if you're just now joining us, you are tuned into the Crew 7 mission. The Crew 7 crew is inside of that Dragon vehicle that you see there on your screen, and they're currently making their way to waypoint 1, which we expect to reach and pass through without a hold in about 7 minutes or so from now.
This view coming from a camera on the International Space Station of Dragon continuing its approach. Again, we are going up and above the space station, so we may eventually have some views of Dragon looking down on the station with the Earth below it. We do anticipate entering an orbital nighttime here shortly. It looks about like 10 minutes till the next sunset. Currently flying 269 statute miles over the Indian Ocean, south of Africa. Another view here from the International Space Station. Dragon is that big bright object pretty much in the center of your screen.